My name is Marina, and I'm 34 years old. I live in a quiet little suburb just outside of Portland, in a modest one-story home with peeling white paint and a crooked mailbox that's older than I am. The house isn't much to look at, but the real treasure lies behind it, my tiny garden. It's barely the size of a two-car driveway, yet to me, it feels like an entire world. A living, breathing patchwork of color, scent, and memory. Every morning before work, I'd step outside with my cup of coffee, toes brushing the cool grass, and breathe in the scent of soil and dew. Rows of marigolds, sunflowers, and basil brushed my knees as I made my way to the back fence. The tomatoes glistened like little rubies. The sound of bees buzzing lazily between blossoms made everything feel alive. My father used to tell me that the earth remembers kindness. Maybe that's why my garden always felt so full of life, because I cared. My father taught me how to plant when I was 8. He used to kneel in the dirt beside me, showing me how to press seeds gently into the soil. "Don't rush," he'd say. "Everything grows when it's ready." When he passed away 5 years ago, the garden became my therapy. Every weed I pulled and every flower I nurtured helped fill the hollow space he left behind. It was more than a hobby, it was a connection to him. Unfortunately, my neighbors didn't see it that way. There's Janet next door, sharp-tongued, always with a glass of wine in hand and her nose in everyone's business. Across the street lives Greg, who constantly complains about property values and noise levels, though he's the one who blasts country music every weekend. They'd watch me from their porches, smirking, whispering. I heard the jokes, "There's Marina, pretending to be a farmer again." Or, "What's she even growing out there? Patience?" It stung, but I never confronted them. What was the point? I didn't care about appearances or fitting into their gossip circles. I just wanted peace, and I had it, right there in my little sanctuary of soil and sunlight. One summer afternoon, while I was watering the dahlias, Janet leaned over the fence with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know, Marina," she said, "you spend all this time out here, but what's the point? You could be traveling, meeting people, living." I smiled politely, though I could feel my jaw tighten. "This is my way of living," I said softly. "It makes me happy." She shrugged. "If you say so. Personally, I think you're wasting good time and bad land." I turned away, pretending to focus on the water stream. Inside, her words sank like a pebble into my chest. The thing about people like Janet is they measure happiness by square footage and luxury cars. I measured mine in blooms and roots. I didn't earn much. I worked as a part-time librarian and tended the garden in my free hours. My life was simple, quiet, and content. Most evenings, I'd sit on the porch swing, sipping tea as the sunset painted the sky. My dog, Poppy, would curl at my feet, tail thumping lazily. I loved those moments, the kind that made you forget the noise of the world, but that peace didn't last. Late one evening in early June, I was sorting through my mail bills, a grocery coupon, and then a sleek white envelope with a gold emblem embossed on the corner. It looked out of place among the usual clutter. My name was printed in bold letters, Marina Greenwood. I frowned, sliding a finger under the seal. Inside was a single-page letter on thick paper. It read, "Dear Miss Greenwood, we are writing on behalf of Riverside Development Group regarding a potential acquisition opportunity in your area. Your property has been identified as a site of interest for future community development. A representative will reach out to discuss terms and possibilities. Sincerely, Riverside Development Group." I blinked, reread it, twice, and laughed out loud. Surely this was some mass-mailed real estate scam. Developers didn't care about my patch of land. My home was modest, my yard small, barely enough room for a shed. Why would anyone be interested in this? I placed the letter on the counter and went back outside, brushing dirt from my hands. The evening air was heavy with the smell of lavender. As I watered the basil, I thought about the letter and couldn't help but chuckle. Maybe someone mistyped an address. Developers didn't look for places like mine, they bought up big lots. Not tiny gardens. Still, a flicker of unease lingered in the back of my mind. There had been rumors of changes coming to the neighborhood, whispers of new stores or apartments. I'd brush them off, but what if there was some truth to them? The next morning, I mentioned it to Janet while collecting my mail. "Oh, that?" she said with a smirk. "Yeah, everyone got one." "Well, everyone except me, because I already talked to them. They're buying out the whole block eventually. You should take whatever they offer. You won't get a better deal. Her words made my stomach twist. I haven't even talked to anyone, I said. She laughed. Don't worry. They'll find you. But honestly, they don't need your lot. It's too small to matter. I forced a polite smile, but something in her tone told me she knew more than she was saying. That night, I sat by the window staring at my garden bathed in moonlight. It looked so peaceful, so familiar. My father's wooden bench still sat beneath the old maple tree. I couldn't imagine losing it. The letter sat on my kitchen counter, gleaming faintly under the lamp. I tried to ignore it, but a strange sense of dread crept up on me, the kind that comes when something ordinary suddenly feels important. I picked it up one last time before bed, reading the words again, my fingers tracing the gold seal. I didn't know what Riverside development I really wanted, but deep down, I felt a shift, a tiny, almost imperceptible ripple in my calm little world. That summer, a letter arrived that would turn my peaceful world upside down. The envelope had an unfamiliar logo and a golden seal. Something told me it was important. When I first saw it, I had no idea that one small letter could cause such chaos in my quiet life. It sat on my counter for a full day before I finally gave in and called the number listed at the bottom. The woman on the phone sounded polite but rehearsed, like someone who'd said the same script 100 times already. Thank you for calling Riverside Development Group, she chirped. Is this Miss Greenwood? Yes, I said hesitantly. I received a letter about a potential acquisition? Ah, yes, her tone brightened. Your property is located at 126 Amberleaf Road, correct? Our records show it's within a target area for redevelopment. One of our representatives can visit to discuss an offer in person. I almost laughed. There must be some mistake. My property is tiny, barely a quarter acre. That's quite all right, Miss Greenwood, she replied smoothly. Size isn't the only factor we consider. Her words hung in my mind long after I hung up. I told myself not to overthink it, maybe they were expanding roads or building some community park. Still, the thought of strangers eyeing my home like a chess piece made me uneasy. When I told Janet about the call, she rolled her eyes. Oh, please. They're just doing their job. I already met with them last week. You should too. They're paying way more than what any of our houses are worth. How much did they offer you? I asked. She smiled slyly, the kind of smile that said she loved having information others didn't. Let's just say I'll finally get that lake house I've been talking about. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying her smug grin in my head. Why? Was she so sure this was a good thing? And why did she seem almost eager for me to sell too? The following week, a man in a crisp gray suit showed up at my gate. He introduced himself as Mr. Allen, a regional acquisitions manager for Riverside Development Group. His handshake was firm, his smile a little too polished. I appreciate you meeting with me, Miss Greenwood, he said, pulling out a folder. We're in the process of acquiring several parcels of land in this area. Your neighborhood is part of a long-term revitalization project, new retail spaces, public parks, better infrastructure. The works. He handed me a paper showing a map with colored blocks marking various lots. My property was highlighted in red, a bright, glaring red. As you can see, your home sits near the center of the proposed layout. We'd like to make you an offer. I skimmed the paper. The number printed there made my stomach flip $80,000. It was more than the house was technically worth on paper, but something about the speed and confidence of the offer made me nervous. That's generous, I said cautiously. But I'm not interested in selling. Mr. Allen's polite expression didn't change. I understand, he said. Many residents feel the same way at first. But this project is happening. Miss Greenwood. Whether you sell now or later, the end result will be the same. We just want to make sure you benefit. There it was, the unspoken pressure. I folded the paper and handed it back. Thank you for the offer, I said, keeping my tone calm. But my home and garden aren't for sale. He gave a small, almost pitying smile. Of course. Take your time. I'll check in again soon. After he left, I sat on the porch steps for a long time, staring at the spot where his car had been. The word revitalization echoed in my head like an accusation. It always sounded so positive, like progress. But for people like me, it meant losing the only piece of peace we had. Over the next few days, I noticed strange things happening around the neighborhood. Surveyors with neon vests and clipboards appeared, pacing up and down the streets. Bright orange flags dotted the grass. A truck marked property assessment stopped in front of my gate more than once. When I stepped outside to ask what they were doing, one of them waved dismissively. Just marking utilities, ma'am, nothing to worry about. But I was worried. Each day, another for sale sign went up on my street. Within 2 weeks, 4 homes were sold, including Janet's. When I asked if she'd really gone through with it, she shrugged. Why fight the inevitable, Marina? You'll sell too. You might as well make something out of it. Her casual tone made my skin crawl. I couldn't explain why, but something about this whole process felt wrong. Rushed, secretive, almost predatory. I spent evenings researching Riverside development online. Their website was polished, full of smiling families and green spaces, but news articles painted a different picture. Lawsuits, environmental complaints, accusations of aggressive land acquisition tactics. That night, I printed everything I found and tucked it into a folder labeled Garden Personal. It was the same folder where I kept my father's deed, the one he'd carefully preserved for decades. As I flipped through the yellowed pages, my eyes caught something unusual. A hand-drawn note on the margin in my father's handwriting. Never sell without knowing the value beneath. I didn't understand what he meant at the time, but those words stuck with me. A week later, a second letter from Riverside arrived this time, marked urgent. It offered nearly double the original price. My heart pounded as I read it. Why were they so desperate for my small patch of land? I walked out into the yard, the letter still trembling in my hand. The garden swayed gently in the evening breeze, oblivious to everything. My father's bench sat in its usual place, weathered but sturdy, as if reminding me of what truly mattered. I knew then that I wouldn't sell. Not for 80,000, not for 150. My home wasn't just property, it was memory. It was meaning. It was mine. What I didn't realize was that my tiny, worthless garden was sitting on a critical piece of land they desperately needed. The first time I noticed something off was when my neighbors stopped saying hello. It wasn't sudden, at least not at first. It started with small changes. People who used to wave when I passed on my morning walks now turned away, pretending to check their mailboxes or water their lawns. The usual chatter that once drifted across our cul-de-sac fell silent whenever I stepped outside. The warmth of our little community vanished almost overnight, replaced with glances sharp enough to cut. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe everyone was just busy. But when even the bakers who'd always been friendly and shared their peaches with me every summer stopped talking, I knew something was wrong. I got my answer a few days later when I overheard 2 neighbors talking near the mailbox. They didn't notice me at first. "Marina's the only one holding out," one said in a low voice. "Yeah, she's being ridiculous," the other replied. "We all sold. It's good money. And that company's doing something great for the area. Why ruin it for everyone?" The words stung. They made it sound like I was the villain for protecting my home. When they noticed me standing there, their conversation died mid-sentence. They muttered quick goodbyes and walked off, leaving me clutching my mail like it might anchor me to something solid. That evening, I saw a truck parked across from my driveway. Inside, a man was taking photos of my property. When I stepped closer, he rolled up the window and drove off without a word. I called the city office the next morning to ask if there were any development permits filed for our street. The woman on the phone sighed softly before answering. "There are preliminary assessments, but nothing final yet," she said. "I'm afraid I can't share details at this stage." Her tone told me everything I wasn't supposed to know what was coming. A few days later, Janet showed up at my door, her usual smug smile firmly in place. She was dressed like she'd already moved on with her life: sunglasses, expensive purse, manicured nails. "You're making this harder for everyone," she said before I could even invite her in. "The developers can't move forward until you agree to sell. Don't you care about the neighborhood?" I stared at her, stunned. "Janet, this is my home. My father built this garden. I'm not selling just because everyone else decided to." She crossed her arms. "You're being selfish, Marina. The rest of us made our peace with progress. You're holding us back." Selfish. The word echoed through my chest like a blow. "I'm not standing in anyone's way," I said quietly. "I'm just choosing differently." She rolled her eyes and turned to leave. "Suit yourself," she muttered. "But don't expect anyone to be friendly after this." She wasn't exaggerating. By the end of the week, the isolation was undeniable. Nobody waved. Kids who used to play near my fence now avoided it entirely. One morning, I found trash dumped in my front yard, a half-empty fast food bag, and a broken garden pot. At first, I cleaned it up, thinking it was random. But when it happened again, twice in the same week, I knew it wasn't an accident. Then came the whispers. When I stopped by the local store, the clerk who'd always chatted with me about gardening suddenly looked uncomfortable. "Heard you're fighting the development," she said under her breath. "They say you're just doing it to get more money." I felt heat rush to my face. "That's not true." She gave a half shrug. "People talk, you know. Maybe you should just let it go." Everywhere I went, I felt the weight of eyes and judgment. One night, as I was locking the gate, I noticed something taped to the mailbox. Inside was a typed note: "You can't stop progress. Sell now before things get messy." My stomach dropped. I looked around, but the street was empty. Every window was dark. I stood there under the streetlight, the note fluttering in my shaking hands. I called the police that night, but the officer on duty barely seemed interested. "Could be a prank," he said. "These things happen when emotions run high. Just ignore it for now." Ignore it. As if it were that simple. The next morning, I noticed muddy footprints near my fence gate, and cigarette butts crushed into the dirt. Someone had been there, watching, waiting. I tried not to let fear consume me, but every sound made me jump. Even Poppy barked at shadows she never used to care about. I started keeping the porch light on all night and double-locked every door. When I told Mr. Allen about the harassment, he acted surprised. "That's terrible," he said, pretending concern. "But you can't honestly think we'd have anything to do with that. We're just a business trying to help the community." His smirk told me he wasn't nearly as innocent as he wanted me to believe. That evening, Janet came by again, her tone softer this time. "You know, Marina," she said, "if you'd just sell, all this would stop. Nobody would bother you anymore. Everyone would move on." I stared at her, realizing she wasn't warning me out of concern. She was pressuring me. I shut the door without a word. For the first time since this started, anger burned hotter than fear. I wasn't just defending my garden anymore, I was defending my dignity, my peace, my father's memory. But deep down, I knew the hostility wouldn't stop there. People who wanted something badly enough rarely played fair. And when the next note appeared, it wasn't a warning, it was a threat. The notes began harmlessly: "Don't ruin the neighborhood's future." At first, they looked like something a teenager might leave as a prank. Plain paper, typed in all caps, with no name or signature. I tried to ignore them, throwing each one straight into the trash. But they kept coming, slipped under the door, wedged in the mailbox, or taped to my gate. Each one sounded a little colder, a little more personal. "People like you don't belong here. Sell before you regret it. You can't stop what's coming." After the fifth note, I started saving them in a folder, labeling each by date. I didn't know why at the time, maybe part of me wanted proof that I wasn't imagining it. Then, things started escalating. One morning, I found my garden fence spray-painted with a single word: "Move." The red paint dripped like blood down the wooden planks. I stood there frozen, coffee mug trembling in my hands. Poppy barked behind me, sensing my tension. That was the moment it stopped feeling like neighborhood gossip and started feeling like war. I called the police again, and an officer came by later that afternoon. He was young, maybe 25, with an easy smile that didn't match the gravity of what I was showing him. "Could be some kids messing around," he said, scribbling half-hearted notes on his pad. "We'll file a report, but unless you catch someone in the act, there's not much we can do." I felt helpless. This was my home, my sanctuary, and now it was being invaded piece by piece. The next day, I set up an old security camera above my porch, one my father had installed years ago but never used. I wanted to believe that would keep them away. For a week, it did. Things went quiet. Then the trash started. First, it was a few beer cans, tossed into my compost bin. Then broken glass scattered near my garden beds. Once, I even found dead plants uprooted and thrown by my front steps, my own flowers, the ones I had nurtured since spring. Whoever was doing this wanted me rattled. I told Mr. Allen about the harassment the next time he called, hoping maybe he'd at least pretend to help. He sighed dramatically. "Miss Greenwood, I can assure you, Riverside has no involvement in these incidents. We pride ourselves on ethical practices. Perhaps some frustrated neighbors are taking things too far?" His tone was smooth but dismissive, as though this was all my fault for standing my ground. "Then tell them to stop." I snapped. You're the one who started this. There was a pause. Then his voice dropped an octave. With all due respect, you're the one refusing to cooperate. If you'd just agree to our offer, none of this would be necessary. He said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that for a moment, I didn't even process the threat laced in his words. I hung up on him and sat there, staring at the wall, pulse thudding in my ears. Over the next few days, I noticed more strangers on my street, men in dark jackets walking slowly past, pretending to check their phones, or sitting in parked cars just long enough to make me uneasy. Janet, of course, had already moved out. Her house sat empty, the sold sign gleaming like a taunt. I hadn't seen her since our last argument. One night, around midnight, I heard footsteps near my garden. Poppy's low growl confirmed I wasn't imagining it. I grabbed a flashlight and crept outside, heart pounding. The beam caught movement, someone ducking behind the fence. "Who's there?" I shouted. No answer. Just the sound of rustling and then the faint crunch of gravel as they ran off. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was had disappeared. The officer took another statement, looked around with a flashlight and shrugged. "Could have been a raccoon," he said. "A raccoon doesn't leave cigarette butts and boot prints." By now, I was jumpy at every sound. I started sleeping with the lights on and locking the windows. I even asked my friend Melinda from work to check in daily just to know someone would notice if something happened to me. Then came the offer, the one that made my skin crawl. Mr. Allen showed up in person this time, unannounced, wearing that same immaculate suit. I met him at the gate, refusing to invite him inside. "Miss Greenwood," he said, smiling thinly, "I'm here to make one last attempt at an amicable solution. We're prepared to raise our offer to $150,000. That's nearly double what your property is worth. All we need is your signature." I crossed my arms. "You can offer $1 million. I'm not selling." His smile vanished. "You're making a mistake. This isn't just about you anymore. The longer you hold out, the more complicated things become. For everyone." "Is that a threat?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. He didn't answer directly, just looked around the garden, his gaze lingering on the broken fence and torn flowers. Then he said quietly, "Everyone has a price. Miss Greenwood, you'll find yours eventually." I slammed the gate shut and locked it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I checked the locks 3 times, then sat by the window watching shadows crawl across the lawn. Around 3 a.m., Poppy started barking frantically. I jumped to my feet and ran to the back door. Through the glass, I saw something flicker light. Firelight. The shed at the edge of my garden was glowing orange, smoke curling into the night sky. I screamed, grabbed the hose, and ran outside barefoot, spraying water as Poppy barked wildly behind me. By the time the fire department arrived, half the shed was gone, and the smell of burnt wood and gasoline filled the air. The firefighters said it was likely arson. No fingerprints, no witnesses. I stood in the ashes of my garden at sunrise, shaking, numb and furious all at once. That's when they sent someone to convince me in person, and it wasn't a friendly visit. It was a rainy afternoon when a black SUV pulled up outside my gate. I remember the sound of its engine, low, heavy, deliberate, as if whoever was inside wanted to make their presence known. I had been inside cleaning up what was left of my shed, still trying to get the smell of smoke out of my clothes. When I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, something in me froze. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He wasn't dressed like the usual surveyors or developers I'd seen before. This one wore a charcoal suit despite the drizzle, and his shoes didn't look like they'd ever touched dirt before. He adjusted his tie, scanned the yard, and then smiled faintly when he saw me standing on the porch. "Miss Greenwood?" His voice was smooth, too calm. "I'm Mr. Keller. I represent Riverside Development Group. May I have a moment of your time?" Even from where I stood, I could tell this wasn't a casual visit. There was something in his posture, confidence mixed with quiet authority. I hesitated, then nodded slowly, staying by the door. "What do you want?" I asked. He gestured toward my garden. "We'd like to resolve this situation quickly. My clients are eager to move forward, and your continued resistance is delaying progress." His choice of words made it sound like I was a problem, not a person. "I've already told your company," I said firmly. "I'm not selling." Keller smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't have to make this difficult, Miss Greenwood. The offer on the table is more than fair. Most people in your position would have accepted weeks ago. I folded my arms. I'm not most people, he chuckled softly. Clearly. There was a long silence, broken only by the rain tapping on the porch roof. Then his tone shifted quieter, but sharper. You know, I've seen this kind of thing before. Someone gets sentimental about a piece of property. They dig their heels in, but in the end, progress always wins. Always. I could feel the hairs on my neck rise. Are you threatening me? Of course not, he said, his smile never wavering. Just giving you a reality check. He took a step closer, and I instinctively stepped back. Let me ask you something, he continued. What's really keeping you here? A few flowers? A sentimental attachment? You could have a fresh start anywhere you want. I already have a home, I said quietly. For a moment, he just studied me. Then he exhaled through his nose, clearly irritated. Everyone has a price, Miss Greenwood. Think about it before you make this harder than it has to be. He turned and walked back toward the SUV, his shoes clicking against the wet driveway. Before getting in, he paused, looking back at the charred remains of my shed. Shame about the fire, he said almost casually. You never know what could happen to old wood in weather like this. Then he was gone. I stood there for several minutes after the SUV disappeared down the road, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. That wasn't a threat, it was a promise. I locked every door and window in the house and called Cassandra, the lawyer I'd consulted briefly after the harassment started. She answered on the second ring, her voice steady and professional. Marina? Slow down, she said after I poured out everything that had happened. You said he made a comment about the fire? Yes, I said. Like he knew something about it. Document everything, she instructed. Names, dates, times. Save those notes you've been getting. If they're trying to intimidate you into selling, that's illegal. Her calmness helped me breathe again. She promised to send me a contact at the county zoning office who could confirm what Riverside was really planning. That night, I made copies of every threatening note and put them in a new folder labeled Keller. Then I sat in my living room with Poppy curled up beside me, listening to the wind and trying to quiet the constant hum of anxiety in my chest. For the first time, I realized how alone I really was. The neighbors who once waved now pretended I didn't exist. Janet had taken her money and vanished. Even my closest coworker, Melinda, told me gently, maybe it's not worth all this, Marina. Maybe you should take the money and move somewhere peaceful. Peaceful? The irony of it almost made me laugh. The next morning, I woke up to find something new on my property, a surveyor's stake driven into the ground near my fence line, marked with bright pink tape. No one had permission to step onto my land, and yet someone had. I called the county office Cassandra had mentioned. The man I spoke to hesitated before answering my questions. All I can tell you, he said carefully, is that Riverside has filed a preliminary zoning request. They can't proceed without acquiring all adjacent lots. And according to our records, yours is the last one left. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. That's why they were so desperate. Without my property, their whole plan stalled. Later that evening, I saw Keller's SUV again. It wasn't parked directly in front of my house. This time, it sat 2 blocks away, engine off, lights dimmed. Watching. I called Cassandra again, and she urged me to file a restraining order if this continued. But before I could take legal steps, something else happened. 3 nights later, at 2:17 a.m., a loud crash jolted me awake. Poppy started barking furiously. I ran to the window and saw that my garden gate had been ripped off its hinges. Someone had rammed it with a vehicle. I ran outside barefoot, rain soaking through my clothes, flashlight trembling in my hand. The SUV was gone, but fresh tire tracks led straight from the road to the gate. The police came again, but just like before, they could only write a report. No cameras caught the plates, the officer said. Maybe install better lighting, as if that could fix the fear clawing inside me. The next morning, as I picked up splintered wood from the driveway, I made myself a silent promise. I wasn't going anywhere. Not because of pride, not even because of the money, but because they thought they could bully me into surrender. They didn't realize it yet, but they'd chosen the wrong woman to push around. 2 days later, I woke up to find my garden destroyed. I remember the smell of gasoline before I even saw the damage. That's how the memory starts, not with the flames, not with the noise, but with that sickly sweet chemical stench that hung heavy in the early dawn air. It was the kind of smell that clings to you, gets under your skin, and reminds you of something unnatural, something that doesn't belong. Poppy had been restless that night, pacing and whining near the back door. I thought it was just another raccoon rummaging through the trash. I got up to check, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and that's when I saw it, the faint orange glow outside my kitchen window. For a moment, I thought it was a trick of the light. Then I heard the crackle dry, brittle, like the snapping of old wood. I ran outside barefoot, and the sight stopped me cold. My garden, my sanctuary, the one piece of peace I had left, it was on fire. Flames danced along the rows of sunflowers, licking up the trellis I'd built with my father years ago. The air shimmered with heat as the shed that had survived the first fire now burned again, collapsing inward like it was surrendering. "No!" I screamed, grabbing the hose. The water pressure was pitiful against the inferno, hissing uselessly. Poppy barked wildly behind me, her cries echoing my own panic. Neighbors peeked through their curtains but didn't come out. Not one person called for help. I ran to the front, screaming for anyone, but the street was silent except for the distant hum of cars on the highway. By the time the fire department arrived, half the garden was gone. The firefighters did their best, dousing the flames until the smoke thinned to a gray haze. One of them, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quietly. "We found accelerant. Gasoline, probably poured over the soil and fence line. Whoever did this knew what they were doing." The words didn't fully register. I stood there, shivering in my soaked pajamas, staring at the blackened earth where my roses used to bloom. The garden looked like a graveyard, my father's bench reduced to ash. The wooden planters charred and splintered. When they left, I sank to my knees in the mud. My hands trembled as I touched what was left of a tomato vine. Its leaves shriveled into dust. Every piece of my father's memory, every ounce of love I'd poured into this soil, was gone. By sunrise, the rain began again, soft and steady, like the sky was mourning with me. Later that morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, waiting for the police. When the officer finally arrived, I recognized him, the same young man from before. He glanced around the yard, took a few photos, and sighed. "Do you have any enemies, Miss Greenwood?" I laughed bitterly. "Apparently, an entire development company." He scribbled something in his notebook. "Any idea who could have done this?" I wanted to scream. "Yes, I know exactly who." But there was no proof, just my gut and the smug voice of Mr. Keller echoing in my mind. "Shame about the fire." The officer handed me his card. "We'll investigate. But unless someone saw something, I didn't need to hear the rest. They weren't going to find anyone. Nobody was looking." After he left, I walked back out to the ruins. Poppy followed, tail low, her paws muddy. I knelt down beside her, my throat tight. "We're not giving up," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince her or myself. For the next few days, I did the only thing I knew how to do: clean. I cleared the debris, pulled out burnt roots, and salvaged what little survived. My hands bled from splinters, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Every time I lifted a charred piece of wood, I heard my father's voice in my head. "Everything grows when it's ready." Maybe this was just another season, a cruel one, yes, but one I could recover from. While digging near the fence, I noticed something strange, a section of soil that felt different, harder beneath the surface. I brushed away the ash and found a small, rusted metal stake with faded paint. It wasn't mine. Someone had been here before the fire, marking something. That's when I decided to pull out my father's old land deed again. Sitting at the kitchen table, I studied every page, tracing the lines of the property borders. There, tucked in the back, was an old note my father had written. "Lot 14 includes historical irrigation channel. Cannot be altered without adjoining owner consent." I read it 3 times before it sank in. My garden wasn't just a random plot of land. It sat on a legal boundary, an old irrigation path that connected several lots together. If the developers needed my property to complete their project, this note might explain why. Without it, their plans wouldn't hold up legally. I scanned the document and sent copies to Cassandra, attaching photos of the fire and the marker I'd found. Within an hour, she called back. "Marina, this changes everything," she said. That irrigation line, it's protected under county law. Can't build over it unless they acquire every parcel connected to it. Yours is the last one. My pulse quickened. So they can't move forward without me? Exactly. That's why they're pushing so hard. You're the key piece they can't get around. I looked out the window at the wreckage of my garden. For the first time since the fire, a strange calm settled over me. They thought they'd broken me. They thought burning my flowers would scare me into surrender. But they had just shown me how much power I really had. I gathered the ashes of what was left of my garden in a small tin and placed it on my mantel beside my father's photograph. "We're not done," I whispered to him. Not even close. For the first time, I realized just how powerful my position was. My father had once mentioned the land deed was special. Now I finally understood what he meant. That night, after Cassandra explained the legal significance of my property, I stayed awake until dawn reading every line of the old documents. The more I read, the clearer it became my little garden wasn't just sentimental land. It was a keystone. The irrigation line mentioned in my father's handwritten note had been part of a 1,940 seconds water management plan that supplied nearby farmland. Most of that land had been sold, paved over, or redeveloped decades ago. But the original easement, the legal pathway of the water, still existed on paper. And it ran directly under my property. That meant any construction over it would be illegal without proper unification of ownership. The developers couldn't legally start their project until they owned every inch of that line, including my lot. For the first time in months, I felt something close to power. Cassandra confirmed it during our next meeting. She spread the documents across her desk like a general planning a battle. "This is a textbook example of leverage," she said. "You hold the piece they need to activate, their zoning rights. Without it, their permit is just paper." I leaned forward. "So they can't build anything without my consent?" "Not a single brick," she replied, smiling slightly. "But don't underestimate them. Once they realize how cornered they are, they'll try new tactics, legal or otherwise." I nodded. "Let them. I'm not giving in." She helped me file for a legal verification of the easement, officially linking my property to the county's historical record. It wasn't a fast process, but once filed, it meant my rights were protected by law. In the meantime, I rebuilt what little I could of the garden, not because I expected to restore it overnight, but because I refused to let them see me defeated. I planted hardy greens and marigolds, the kind that grow fast and strong even in poor soil. Every seed I placed in the dirt felt like a small act of rebellion. Mr. Allen called a week later. His tone was still polite, but there was an edge now. "We heard you've been working with an attorney," he said. "I hope you understand. That's not necessary. We can resolve this peacefully." "Peacefully?" I repeated. "After what your people have done to me." He hesitated. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. We'd like to offer you $400,000 for your property final offer. That's well above market value." I almost laughed. "You're not offering that kind of money out of generosity, Mr. Allen. You're desperate." His silence confirmed it. "I'll take it as a no then," he said finally. "But I should warn you, holding out isn't in your best interest. Developers have ways of making things complicated. Let them try," I said and hung up. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse to file Cassandra's paperwork myself. The clerk, an older man with silver-rimmed glasses, flipped through the forms and gave me a knowing look. "You're not the first homeowner to deal, like with Riverside," he said quietly. "But you're one of the few with something solid to stand on. Keep those records safe." When I walked out of the courthouse, the autumn air felt different, crisp, alive, electric with possibility. Over the next few weeks, things in the neighborhood shifted. The empty houses around mine stood silent, windows boarded up, lawns overgrown. Construction signs had been posted at the end of the street, but no work had begun. They couldn't move forward without my land. I was their roadblock. For the first time, the balance of fear tipped. Every day, I documented everything: photos of survey stakes, copies of letters, timestamps on phone calls. Cassandra told me, "If they push you, we'll push back harder." And they did push. I started getting official-looking envelopes, letters accusing me of non-compliance with community improvement initiatives, citing imaginary fines. The code enforcement officer even showed up once to inspect my overgrown vegetation. When I asked who filed the complaint, he shrugged. "Anonymous." I handed him my legal documents, explaining that I was within my rights. He read the papers, nodded, and said quietly, "Good for you, ma'am. Don't let them scare you." Word of my defiance must have reached Riverside, because 2 days later, Keller returned. No SUV this time, he came in a sleek black sedan, parked halfway down the block like he wanted to be discreet. He leaned on my fence as if we were old friends. "You've been busy," he said, glancing toward the replanted garden. "I have," I said coolly. "And before you waste your breath, I'm not selling." His smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. "This isn't about money anymore, Miss Greenwood. You're standing in the way of progress. People are losing patience." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "Then tell your people to learn patience." "I'm not moving." He studied me for a long moment, before sighing. "You remind me of someone I knew once, stubborn, idealistic. She thought she could fight the system too." "What happened to her?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "She moved." He turned and walked away. After he left, I called Cassandra again. She wasn't surprised. "They'll keep testing you, Marina. It's how they operate, but you've got them trapped. Don't flinch." That night, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by documents, maps, and photos. My garden outside was nothing like before, smaller, barer, but it was still mine. And under that soil lay the very thing that tied this entire neighborhood together. They thought I was a nobody clinging to sentimentality. But the truth was, I was holding the thread that could unravel their whole empire. For the first time since this all began, I didn't feel scared. I felt strong. Their smiles vanished, and that's when the real battle began. They couldn't scare me anymore, so they tried to ruin me instead. When intimidation failed, Riverside Development changed tactics. Instead of threats at my doorstep, they began attacking me from the shadows quietly, strategically, and cruelly. It started with whispers. At the grocery store, I overheard 2 women talking in the next aisle. "She's the one who won't sell," one said. "Yeah, I heard she's mentally unstable," the other replied. "Probably one of those hoarders. You know how some people get." I froze mid-step, staring at the shelves of canned soup as their words sank in. They were talking about me repeating rumors that hadn't even existed a week earlier. Within days, those whispers turned into something uglier. My mailbox filled with pamphlets about neighborhood cleanliness and property neglect. Code enforcement officers started showing up again, citing imaginary violations. "Too much debris in the yard," they said. "Unregistered outbuildings." It was absurd. My yard was cleaner than most in the neighborhood, but I could tell they weren't there for that. They were there to make me feel cornered. I knew Riverside was behind it. This was psychological warfare, the corporate version. Cassandra called it a smear campaign. "They're trying to paint you as irrational," she said. "If they can damage your reputation, it'll weaken your credibility if this goes to court." That was when I realized this wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was character assassination. Then came the online attacks. A local Facebook group called Amberleaf Neighbors United suddenly started posting about me. Anonymous users claimed I was blocking community growth, that I was profiting off holding the neighborhood hostage. Someone even uploaded a photo of my burned garden with the caption, "Some people don't deserve the land they have." I reported the post, but it spread faster than I could keep up. Friends stopped responding to my texts. Melinda, the only person from work who had supported me, quietly distanced herself. "It's just getting too stressful," she said one afternoon. "People are talking, Marina. They think you're doing this for money." I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that this was about my father, my home, my right to exist in peace. But what was the point? No one wanted to hear the truth. Late one night, I heard someone outside again. I looked through the blinds and saw flashlights moving near the fence. When I went outside with my phone recording, the lights vanished. The next morning, I found a broken plant pot and a note lying beside it. "If you cared about peace, you'd have sold by now." That was the moment I realized I needed to fight differently. Not just to protect my home, but to defend my name, Cassandra agreed. "They're using the court of public opinion," she said. "So we'll use the court of law." She began gathering evidence, screenshots, photographs, and copies of every false complaint. I spent hours cataloging everything, creating folders labeled harassment, property damage, and defamation. It was exhausting, but it gave me purpose. A week later, I received a letter from Riverside's legal team accusing me of publicly defaming their company through false statements. They were threatening to sue me for libel me, the victim. Cassandra wasn't surprised. "This is what they do," she said. "They push you into fear of retaliation. But don't respond directly, let me handle it." Still, it was hard to stay calm. Every day felt like a test of willpower. I'd walk outside and feel eyes on me from the construction site down the road, from neighbors pretending to garden, even from cars that slowed just a little too much as they passed my house. At night, I could barely sleep. I'd sit on my couch with a cup of tea, staring at the flickering shadows outside. Poppy would rest her head on my lap, sensing my unease. I started journaling everything, not just events, but emotions. It helped me hold on to who I was beneath all the noise. But just when I thought things couldn't get worse, they did. Someone created a fake real estate listing online using my address. The ad claimed my home was for sale, listed at a ridiculously low price. My phone was flooded with calls from strangers asking when they could come for viewings. It took days to get the listing taken down, but by then the damage was done. People laughed about it in the local cafe, calling it the crazy gardener's last stand. It was humiliating, but it also fueled me. The harder they tried to destroy my reputation, the more determined I became to expose them. I wasn't going to hide anymore. One afternoon, while sorting through another pile of unwanted mail, I received a handwritten envelope with no return address. Inside was a single note. "Not everyone believes the lies. Some of us see what they're doing. L." There was no explanation, no phone number, just that brief message. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. Later that week, Cassandra called with a new update. "A journalist reached out," she said. "She's been following local land disputes, and she's particularly interested in Riverside's tactics. Her name's Lacey." The name hit me like a spark. Could she be the one who wrote the note? "She wants to meet you," Cassandra continued. "If you're comfortable, I think it could help. She might be able to shift the narrative." I hesitated. After everything I'd been through, trusting anyone felt dangerous. But deep down, I knew Cassandra was right. If I wanted the truth to be heard, I needed a bigger voice. The next day, I agreed to meet the reporter at my home. When she arrived, she was nothing like the corporate sharks I'd grown used to. Lacey was in her early 30s, with wind-tangled hair, worn jeans, and a notebook full of scribbles. Her handshake was warm, her eyes kind. "Miss Greenwood," she said softly, scanning the charred remnants of my garden. "You've been through a lot. I want to help you tell your story." For the first time in months, someone wasn't asking me to sell, to move, or to surrender. They were asking to listen. I led her through the garden, explaining everything: the letters, the threats, the fire, and the lies. She took notes quietly, her expression darkening as I spoke. By the end, she looked at me with something like respect. "I believe you," she said. Until I got a call from a journalist who wanted to hear my side of the story. Her name was Lacey, a local reporter who believed in underdog stories. From the moment she stepped into my home, I could tell she was different from anyone who'd come before. She didn't bring contracts or threats. She brought curiosity and compassion. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, recorder in hand, notebook open, listening as if every word mattered. "I want the truth," she said. "Not the corporate version. Yours." So I told her everything. About the letters, the threats, the fires, the fake complaints, every vile tactic Riverside had used to break me. When I showed her the old deed and my father's note about the irrigation line, her eyes widened. "This is huge," she murmured. "If what you're saying is accurate, they've been violating multiple county ordinances just by pressuring you to sell." I nodded, my voice shaking slightly. "I don't want revenge, Lacey. I just want peace and for them to stop pretending they're the good guys." She smiled faintly. "Then let's show everyone who they really are." We spent nearly 4 hours together that afternoon. She took photos of the garden, what was left of it, and the burned shed. She photographed the threatening letters and the notes taped to my gate. Every detail mattered to her. When she finally left, she promised she'd run the story within a week. I didn't expect much. I'd been disappointed too many times to believe anyone could actually make a difference. But then, the story aired. It hit the local news first: "Woman refuses to sell her home to corporate developer." The piece showed footage of my small house surrounded by overgrown lots and construction fencing. Then it cut to me, standing in the ruins of my garden, my voice trembling as I said, "They tried to scare me, but I won't be bullied out of my home." Within hours, the story spread. Local blogs picked it up, then regional papers, then social media. My inbox exploded with messages, hundreds of strangers sending support. Some offered legal advice, others just encouragement. "You're brave," one email read. "Don't let them win." Another said, "My grandmother went through the same thing. Thank you for standing up." For the first time in months, the silence around me broke. The same neighbors who once mocked me now avoided eye contact. They couldn't hide from what they'd done. Even Greg, who'd called me stubborn before, mumbled an awkward "sorry" one morning while mowing his new rental property. Lacey's story did more than just expose Riverside, it made them visible. Their tactics were no longer secret. People started digging into the company's background, finding lawsuits in other states, environmental violations, and community protests. Within a week, the hashtag number #StandWithMarina began trending locally. Someone even started a GoFundMe to help me restore my garden, though I politely declined it. I didn't want money, I wanted justice. Cassandra was thrilled. "You've shifted the narrative completely," she said. "Now they're the aggressors, and you're the face of resilience. Keep documenting everything, we'll need it when they retaliate." Because she was right. They would retaliate. It started subtly, a statement from Riverside's PR department claiming that their community development efforts were being misrepresented by a single disgruntled property owner. Then a follow-up article accusing me of refusing reasonable negotiation. But this time, people didn't buy it. The public had seen the scorched garden, the photos of the vandalism, and the blank look in my eyes as I talked about losing everything I'd built. A few nights after the story aired, Lacey called me. "They're panicking," she said. "Their lawyers sent my editor a notice threatening to sue for defamation, but we're not backing down. Everything you gave me checks out." I could hear the determination in her voice. It gave me strength. The following week, she aired a follow-up piece featuring interviews with other residents who had sold their homes to Riverside. A few admitted they'd been pressured too. One woman even confessed she'd been promised a bonus payment for convincing me to sell a promise that never materialized. That revelation sent shockwaves through the community. The people who'd mocked me were now realizing they'd been pawns. Suddenly, Riverside wasn't a powerful development firm bringing progress, it was a bully caught in the act. I began receiving invitations to speak at local council meetings and community events. Me, a librarian who once spent her evenings quietly tending plants. Now, people wanted to hear my voice. I wasn't sure how to handle the attention. Part of me wanted to crawl back into solitude, but another part knew my father would have told me to stand tall. He used to say, "You can't grow roots if you keep running from the rain." One night, after a long interview, I sat in my garden with a lantern beside me, staring at the half-burned fence. Poppy lay quietly at my feet. The air was cool, the scent of earth stronger than ever. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, calm. But that peace didn't last. The morning after Lacey's second story aired, a thick envelope arrived on my doorstep. It wasn't another threat this time. It was a legal summons. Riverside Development was suing me for interference with commercial operations and obstruction of economic progress. I laughed bitterly. They'd gone from vandalism to smear campaigns, and now they were trying to drag me into court. I called Cassandra immediately. "They're suing me," I said, my voice trembling. "I figured they might," she replied calmly. "Don't worry, Marina, we're ready for this." Her confidence steadied me. Maybe they thought I'd crumble under the weight of a lawsuit, but they'd underestimated how much fire I had left. I didn't know their next move would drag me straight into court. They accused me of obstructing public development and hindering economic progress. The words alone sounded ridiculous, like something pulled straight from a corporate propaganda sheet. But the reality hit me the moment I walked into the courthouse. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a spectacle. Cameras lined the steps, reporters whispered into microphones, and I could feel dozens of eyes following me as I climbed the stairs with Cassandra by my side. "Remember," she said quietly, her heels clicking in sync with mine, "stay calm, they want to rattle you. Don't give them the satisfaction." Inside the courtroom, Riverside's lawyers sat in a perfect row, 3 men and 1 woman, all in dark suits, all with expressions as sharp as scalpels. At the far end of the table sat Mr. Keller, smirking like a man who thought he'd already won. I took my seat beside Cassandra, heart hammering against my ribs. The judge, an older woman with stern eyes, entered and called the court to order. As the session began, Riverside's lead attorney stood up, adjusting his tie with practiced ease. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about one woman's right to enjoy her property. It's about progress, economic advancement for an entire community. My client, Riverside Development Group, has invested millions into revitalizing this district. Yet, one individual, Miss Marina Greenwood, continues to obstruct that progress for personal gain." His voice dripped with feigned disappointment. I clenched my hands in my lap, forcing myself not to react. When it was Cassandra's turn, she stood with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, this case isn't about progress. It's about power and how far a corporation will go to take what doesn't belong to them. My client has faced harassment, threats, property destruction, and defamation, all because she refused to sell her legally owned land." Her tone was sharp but calm, every word deliberate. She handed the judge a thick folder. "These are police reports, photos, and witness statements documenting months of intimidation by individuals connected to the plaintiff's company." Keller shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The trial stretched on for days. Each morning, I'd wake before dawn, drink coffee in silence, and steel myself for another round of scrutiny. Riverside's lawyers threw everything they could at me, twisting my words, implying I'd exaggerated the threats, suggesting the fire might have been an unfortunate accident. But Cassandra dismantled them piece by piece. She presented the old land deed, the historical easement documents, and expert testimony from a county engineer who confirmed that construction on my property would violate water management laws. One afternoon during cross-examination, Cassandra leaned forward and asked one of Riverside's representatives a simple question. "Can you proceed with your development project without Miss Greenwood's parcel?" The man hesitated. "Technically, no." Her next question came like a hammer. "So, in other words, this entire lawsuit is an attempt to force her into selling through intimidation and legal pressure?" The courtroom went silent. The representative fumbled for words, but the damage was done. I watched Keller's jaw tighten. Outside the courtroom, Lacey's coverage had turned the case into headline news. Protesters gathered on the courthouse steps with signs that read, "Protect homeowners and stop corporate bullying." Strangers sent letters of encouragement to my attorney's office. For once, I wasn't the one being mocked. Riverside was. Still, the trial took a toll. Each night, I came home exhausted, my nerves frayed. I'd walk into my half-rebuilt garden, sit on the cold bench and whisper to the air, "We're almost there, Dad. I promise." On the final day, both sides gave their closing arguments. Riverside's attorney repeated their familiar line, "One person cannot stand in the way of progress." Then Cassandra stood, her voice steady but fierce. "Your Honor, progress without integrity isn't progress at all. It's exploitation. My client isn't stopping growth, she's stopping greed. The plaintiff has no legal, moral, or ethical right to destroy what she's built, or to bully her into submission." Her words rang through the courtroom like a bell. Even the judge seemed to pause for a moment before nodding slowly. I barely breathed as the judge reviewed the evidence. Time stretched until every second felt like a minute. Finally, she looked up and spoke. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, Miss Greenwood. The plaintiff's claims are without merit. Furthermore, the court acknowledges evidence of harassment and coercive practices by individuals associated with Riverside Development Group. Miss Greenwood's property rights are hereby affirmed and she is awarded damages for emotional distress and property loss." I felt my knees go weak. Cassandra squeezed my hand, smiling for the first time in weeks. "You did it," she whispered. Reporters swarmed as we left the courthouse, microphones flashing like lightning. Someone shouted, "Marina, how does it feel to win?" I stopped at the top of the steps, the cool air filling my lungs. "It feels like justice," I said simply. "For every person who's ever been told to back down, this is proof you don't have to." The crowd erupted in applause. That night, I sat in my garden under a sky scattered with stars. The air smelled like rain and earth, clean, alive. I closed my eyes and listened to the quiet, the kind of peace I hadn't felt in so long. But as I leaned back against the bench, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. A new email notification lit up the screen. It was from Riverside Development Group. The subject line read, "Revised offer." My heart skipped. I opened it, and the number made me gasp. $2.4 million. They were back. But even victory couldn't prepare me for the shocking offer that followed. The new letter came by certified mail, the same golden seal as before. It was almost poetic, like they couldn't resist the symbolism of it. The same company that had sent me threats, that had dragged me through court and ruined my peace, now wanted to talk business again. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the envelope for a long time before opening it. My name was printed neatly on the front, no handwriting, no return address. Just the seal Riverside Development Group, embossed in gold like a promise and a warning all at once. I tore it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a formal offer, typed and signed by their new CEO, Amelia Rhodes. It read, "Dear Miss Greenwood, we understand the difficulties that have occurred during our previous negotiations. On behalf of Riverside Development Group, I extend our sincerest apologies for any actions that caused distress. We would like to make a new offer for your property at 126 Amberleaf Road in the amount of $2.4 million, contingent upon immediate transfer of ownership. We hope to begin a new chapter with respect and cooperation. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, Amelia Rhodes, CEO." I just sat there, staring at that number. $2.4 million. For my small, half-burned garden, for my modest little house with peeling paint and creaky floors, it didn't seem real. When Cassandra arrived later that day, I handed her the letter wordlessly. She scanned it, raised her eyebrows, and gave a low whistle. "Well," she said, "it seems they finally understand what your land is actually worth. Is this even real?" I asked. "After everything they've done?" "Oh, it's real," she said. "They lost the legal route, the intimidation didn't work, and now they're desperate. Your property is the linchpin of their entire project. They can't build without it, and time is money. Millions in their case." I leaned back in my chair, mind spinning. $2.4 million. I could pay off every debt, buy a new house, travel, start over somewhere fresh. I could even start a new garden, far away from this nightmare. But as quickly as those thoughts came, something inside me resisted. My father's voice echoed in my head, the one I heard every time I stood in the dirt, planting something small and hopeful. "Some things can't be priced, Marina." Cassandra watched me quietly. "You don't have to decide now," she said. "But remember, you hold all the cards. They need you more than you need them." That night, I walked through what remained of my garden. The charred fence still stood at the back, a scar from the months of fighting. The new seedlings I'd planted after the trial had started to sprout, tiny flecks of green pushing through dark soil. I knelt beside them, brushing the dirt with my fingers. "What would you do, Dad?" I whispered. The question hung in the air, unanswered. A few days later, Riverside requested a meeting. Cassandra agreed to accompany me. We met at their downtown office, a gleaming glass tower with polished marble floors and a lobby that smelled faintly of lemon and money. Amelia Rhodes was waiting for us in the conference room. She was in her early 40s, composed, elegant, and nothing like Keller or Allen. Her handshake was firm, her smile professional but not cold. "Miss Greenwood," she said warmly, "I want to apologize for everything that's happened. The actions of certain former employees were unacceptable. I assure you, Riverside wants to make things right." I didn't respond immediately. Cassandra and I exchanged a glance before sitting down. Amelia continued, "We've reassessed our approach. We want to move forward peacefully. You have something we need, and we're willing to compensate you fairly, very fairly." I studied her face, trying to read between the lines. "You're offering me $2.4 million, I said slowly. "Why now?" She didn't flinch. "Because we realized your property sits on a valuable section of land, one, essential to our long-term environmental design. Without it, our plan can't proceed as intended. We're not just building a mall anymore. We're creating a sustainable mixed-use community, green spaces, walking trails, gardens. It's meant to preserve natural beauty." Her words sounded rehearsed, polished by a PR team. But something about that phrase, green spaces, caught my attention. "So you're telling me," I said, "you burned my garden, dragged me to court, and ruined my life, because you want to build green spaces?" Amelia's expression softened, and for a second, she almost looked sincere. "I can't change the past, Miss Greenwood, but I can offer you a future, one that honors what you've built here." I wanted to laugh at the irony. They had spent months trying to destroy my garden, and now they wanted to build their own version of it. Cassandra leaned forward. My client will need time to review this offer, she said. We're happy to provide documentation. After the meeting, Cassandra and I sat in her car in the parking garage, the city noise echoing faintly around us. What do you think? I asked. She tapped the steering wheel thoughtfully. I think you're in a powerful position, but I also think there's more to this story. They don't offer $2.5 million just to make peace. Something else is driving this. Her suspicion mirrored my own. You think there's another motive? I'd bet on it, she said. Let's find out what they're really after before we make a move. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain tapped gently against the window, and the air smelled of earth again, that familiar, grounding scent that always reminded me of my father's hands. I thought about what $2.4 million could mean for my life, and about everything I'd fought to protect. I looked out the window at my small patch of earth, at the stubborn little sprouts pushing through ash and mud, and for the first time, I wondered what else lay beneath them, what Riverside knew that I didn't. But when she mentioned their future plans, one word caught my attention and made me rethink everything. She said they wanted to build a green space community park. At first, I thought it was another PR ploy, a convenient buzzword meant to soften the truth. But the more Amelia spoke, the more I sensed there was something underneath her careful phrasing. Her words were too deliberate, too polished, like she was tiptoeing around something. When the meeting ended, I thanked her politely, though every instinct told me not to trust her. Cassandra stayed quiet until we were back in the car. Then she said, You noticed it too, didn't you? The way she avoided certain details? I asked. Cassandra nodded. They're hiding something, and whatever it is, it's the reason they want your land so badly. That night, I sat at my desk with a cup of cold coffee, rereading the new proposal. It talked about sustainability, revitalization, community gardens, and recreational spaces, all noble things. But it never once explained why my specific property was indispensable. So, I started digging. I searched county records, environmental reports, and zoning proposals. Most of it was dry legal jargon, but after hours of clicking through old files, I found something that made me stop cold. A recent geological survey, buried deep in a land use document, mentioned a natural underground spring running beneath the western edge of my property, the same section marked red on Riverside's project map. My pulse quickened. I printed the report and called Cassandra immediately. An underground spring? She repeated, incredulous. Are you sure? I'm looking at it right now. It's listed as a protected water source under county law. There was a pause on the line. Marina, that could be it. If there's a spring beneath your land, it's not just about property anymore. It's about water rights. Her words hit me like lightning. Water rights. That explained everything. The desperation, the threats, the lawsuit, even the sudden apology letter. They didn't just want my land. They needed control over what was under it. Cassandra promised to verify the report. By the next morning, she called back, her voice almost trembling with disbelief. You were right. The spring under your property is pure, untouched. If they gain access, they could sell water rights worth tens of millions. They're trying to rebrand it as an eco-friendly development, but it's really about exploitation. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the sunlight spilling across the floor, trying to process it. All those sleepless nights, all that pain over water. They burned my garden for this? I whispered. Cassandra's tone hardened. They didn't just want your land, Marina. They wanted your silence. I hung up and went outside. The soil still carried faint traces of ash, but new shoots had begun to rise, green and stubborn. I knelt down, pressed my hand into the dirt, and felt the coolness beneath. The idea that something pure and powerful had been running under my home this whole time filled me with awe and anger in equal measure. My father must have known. That note in the deed, never sell without knowing the value beneath, suddenly made perfect sense. He'd discovered the spring decades ago, maybe even built the irrigation channels to protect it. And he'd trusted that I would too. By that evening, Cassandra had drafted a new legal notice. We filed an injunction with the county to prevent Riverside from accessing or redirecting the spring. If they wanted to fight for it, they'd have to do it publicly, in full view of the same community that now supported me. For the first time since this nightmare began, the balance of power truly shifted. The next day, I received a call from Amelia herself. Miss Greenwood, she said, her voice controlled but strained. I understand you filed an injunction. I wish you'd spoken to me first. I've spoken to enough of your people, I said flatly. You should have been honest. You don't understand, she insisted. The spring could help thousands of residents. We could create an entire sustainable ecosystem here. I almost laughed. By destroying mine? She went quiet. We're not your enemies, Marina. We want to work with you. Her tone softened again, that practiced sincerity of someone used to buying cooperation. You could be part of this. We could name the park after your family, honor your father's memory. Isn't that what he would have wanted? For a brief moment, I felt the tug of emotion, the image of my father's name on a plaque, remembered for his love of the land. But then I remembered the smoke, the vandalism, the fear. You don't get to use my father's memory to justify greed, I said. If you really want to honor him, you'll leave this land alone. Her silence was cold and heavy. You'll regret this, she said finally. Before ending the call, I stood there in my living room, phone still in my hand, as her words echoed in my mind. Maybe she was right, maybe I would regret it. But not as much as I would have regretted selling my integrity. Later that night, as I sat outside under the soft hum of crickets, an idea began to take shape, something bold, something that would protect the spring forever while turning Riverside's greed into irony. If they wanted the land so badly, maybe I could give it to them, just not in the way they expected. I stayed up past midnight sketching the plan, my heart racing with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I realized I held the ultimate card in this game. I told them I'd think about it. Then I came up with an idea that would honor my father and outsmart them completely. Instead of selling the land outright, I proposed a partnership. It wasn't an impulsive choice, it was calculated, deliberate, and born out of months of pain, reflection, and stubborn resilience. I realized that if I sold the land, the spring would vanish into corporate hands forever. But if I found a way to share it on my terms, I could protect what mattered most and still turn the situation into something meaningful. I called Cassandra the next morning and laid out my plan. She listened without interrupting, her pen tapping lightly against her notepad. When I finished, she leaned back and smiled slowly. That's brilliant, Marina. You're not giving up the land, you're controlling the narrative. The idea was simple but powerful. Instead of selling, I'd lease my property to Riverside for 25 years. They could build their so-called eco-community park, but the deed and ownership would remain in my name. The water rights, the true heart of it all, would stay under my control. The spring would be legally protected from exploitation. And one more clause sealed the deal: any green space or garden built on the property would be officially registered under my father's name. When Cassandra finished drafting the agreement, she looked up at me with quiet pride. They'll fight this, but they can't reject it without revealing their real motive. If they accept, you win. If they refuse, they expose themselves. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months: hope. We sent the proposal directly to Amelia Rhodes. The response came within 48 hours, a request for another meeting. This time, when I walked into Riverside's office, I wasn't the trembling woman they'd once tried to intimidate. I was calm, confident, and holding every advantage. Amelia was waiting in the same glass conference room, her expression unreadable. Miss Greenwood, she said as I sat down, your proposal is unusual. Unusual doesn't mean impossible, I said. She scanned the document again, her manicured nails tracing the clause about the spring. You're asking to retain full ownership and water rights, while we handle development and maintenance. Correct, I said. You can build your park, add your green spaces, promote your sustainability agenda, but this land stays mine. My father's legacy stays intact. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then she looked up at me, her tone carefully neutral. You realize this gives you considerable power over the project. I do, I said. Consider it my insurance policy. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. You've learned how to play the game, Miss Greenwood. No, I said quietly. I've learned how to end it. She studied me for a long time, then finally extended her hand. I'll have my legal team review the terms, but I think we can make this work. Cassandra's eyes widened slightly, but she stayed silent until we left the building. Once outside, she let out a long breath. You did it, Marina. You turned their own greed into leverage. 2 weeks later, the agreement was finalized. Riverside officially signed the 25-year lease. The county records listed me as the sole landowner and guardian of the spring. The project would proceed, but only within the boundaries I set. It was surreal watching construction begin under my conditions. Bulldozers rolled in, not to destroy, but to reshape. Workers built paths and planted trees around the area where my garden once stood. I supervised every stage, ensuring nothing disturbed the underground spring. The first time I saw the new park layout, my eyes filled with tears. Where my father's bench had once stood, the blueprints now showed a circular garden named the Victor Sanctuary. My father's name Victor would live on, carved into stone, surrounded by life. When the announcement went public, people called me a visionary. The gardener who outsmarted the developers. One headline read. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. All I'd ever wanted was peace, yet somehow, I'd become a symbol of resistance. The same neighbors who once mocked me sent letters of apology. Greg even stopped by one morning, holding a small potted plant. For the new garden, he said awkwardly. I was wrong about you, Marina. I accepted it with a quiet smile. It's not about being right, I said. It's about standing for something. As the park neared completion, Riverside began promoting it everywhere, their flagship sustainable project. But this time, they couldn't erase the truth. My name was on every plaque and every press release as the owner and environmental partner. Cassandra and I attended the pre-opening ceremony together. As I stood under the banner with my father's name engraved in stone, a wave of emotion washed over me. I'd lost so much: my garden, my privacy, my peace, but I'd gained something far greater: control, dignity, and a legacy that couldn't be bought or burned. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the park in gold, I sat alone on the new bench overlooking the fountain built around the spring. The sound of the water was soft and steady, eternal. I whispered. We did it, Dad. Poppy lay beside me, tail thumping lazily against the grass. Children's laughter drifted from the nearby playground, blending with the chirping of crickets. Life had returned, not the same as before, but renewed. I didn't feel like I'd won a war. I felt like I'd finally made peace with it. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't fighting. I was living. But just as I thought the story had finally reached its end, Cassandra received a call from City Hall. The mayor wanted to meet me personally, but I never expected what the mayor would offer me next. The mayor visited personally to thank me for preserving the town's last natural spring. It was a bright, crisp morning, the kind that smelled faintly of dew and pine. The park was finally complete. A blend of winding pathways, blooming gardens, and gentle streams flowing from the spring that had started it all. I was standing near the entrance, checking the final details of the memorial plaque for my father, when I heard footsteps behind me. Miss Greenwood? I turned to see a man in his early 50s, dressed in a dark suit but smiling like an old friend. Mayor Collins, he introduced himself, extending his hand. I've wanted to meet you in person. I owe you more than you realize. I smiled politely. I'm not sure about that, Mayor. I just wanted to protect what was already here. He chuckled softly. That's exactly why you deserve the credit. This park, this spring, has become the centerpiece of our town's renewal. The people love it. You turned what could have been another commercial nightmare into something that actually gives back. We walked along the stone path that curved around the new flower beds. The scent of jasmine and rosemary filled the air. I could hear laughter from families picnicking near the benches, the sound of children chasing each other through the grass. It felt almost unreal to see people enjoying the space where, not long ago, there had been nothing but ash and conflict. The mayor stopped near the fountain, the one built around the natural spring. Water shimmered in the sunlight, and etched into the stone rim were the words, "The Victor Garden Sanctuary, dedicated to those who plant hope and protect life." My father's name beneath that inscription made my throat tighten. You gave this community something priceless, the mayor said quietly. And I'd like to give something back. He reached into his coat pocket and handed me a sealed envelope embossed with the city's emblem. It's an official proposal, he explained. We'd like to name the entire park after your father permanently, not just the garden section. It will be known as Victor Greenwood Memorial Park. I stared at him, unable to speak for a moment. That's an incredible honor. You earned it, he said simply. Sometimes one person's courage changes the direction of an entire city. The emotion hit me all at once. My father's memory, my years of struggle, the endless nights of fear and fire and defiance, all of it had led to this moment. I nodded, tears blurring the edges of the world. Thank you, Mayor Collins. My father would have loved this. He smiled warmly. And he'd be proud of you, Miss Greenwood. You didn't just save a garden, you built a legacy. After he left, I walked the park's perimeter alone, soaking it all in. The air was filled with the sounds of life birds, laughter, running water. The soil beneath my feet was rich and damp, teeming with new growth. It was strange, standing there, knowing this was once the same patch of land that people called worthless, the same place I was mocked for tending, the same earth that greedy men tried to take from me. And yet, now, it was a sanctuary not just for me, but for everyone. I wandered to the old spot where my father's wooden bench had once stood. The new bench was stone now, smooth and cool, with an inscription across the top that read, "Everything grows when it's ready." The words made me smile through my tears. I sat down, feeling the breeze brush my hair and the warmth of the morning sun against my face. The spring water bubbled softly nearby, catching the light like silver threads. Poppy, older now but still as loyal as ever, lay at my feet, eyes half closed in contentment. I closed my eyes and listened. The world had changed, but the heartbeat of the land remained the same. As the afternoon stretched on, people came and went, joggers, families, couples holding hands. A few recognized me and waved. Some thanked me quietly as they passed. One little girl stopped near my bench, clutching a dandelion puff. "Are you the garden lady?" she asked shyly. I smiled. "I suppose I am." She grinned, then blew on the dandelion, sending white tufts spinning through the air. "My mom says you saved this place. Thank you." I watched the seeds drift upward, carried by the wind. "You're welcome," I said softly. "Just promise me you'll take care of it too." She nodded solemnly before running back to her mother. As evening settled, golden light poured through the trees, bathing the park in a soft, almost magical glow. The fountain sparkled, the flowers swayed gently, and the air hummed with quiet joy. Cassandra arrived just before sunset, her face lit by that same warm light. "They finalized the name," she said, handing me the official notice. "It's yours, well, your father's." The council approved it unanimously. I took the paper, my hands trembling slightly. "We really did it, didn't we?" she smiled. "You did, Marina. You turned loss into life. I hope you know that." We sat together on the bench for a while, watching as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees. Neither of us spoke much, there wasn't anything left to say. The quiet said it all. When Cassandra finally left, I stayed behind, letting the cool evening air settle around me. The lamplights flickered on one by one, casting a soft glow across the paths. The park was peaceful now, almost sacred. I traced my fingers over my father's name on the plaque, whispering, "We did it, Dad. We really did." The spring gurgled softly beside me, and for a brief, inexplicable moment, I could have sworn I felt him there, the warmth of his presence, the same calm patience he used to have when we planted seeds together. I smiled through my tears and took a deep breath. The scent of fresh earth and flowers filled the air, rich and alive. People pass by now and smile when they see me sitting here. They don't know the whole story, the fear, the fights, the losses. They just see a woman in a park, tending flowers beside a fountain. And that's exactly how I want it. Because this garden, this park is no longer a battlefield. It's a testament. A symbol that even the smallest patch of earth, when protected with love and stubbornness, can grow into something powerful enough to change everything. And every time I see those flowers bloom, I remember, sometimes the smallest roots hold the greatest power.